our temperate woodland birds are in trouble. They need our help, and that brings me to the role that I'm working in at the moment. Our project area is in the fertile soils of the southwest slopes of the slopes to summit region, so sort of that western southwest side of the Great Dividing Range. But the woodland corridor essentially, and the woodland birds are found, as you know, from Victoria right up that Great Dividing Range into southern Queensland.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. I'm your host, Guillaume Doerig, and I usually do a segment for listener shoutouts at this point, but there's no listener shoutouts today. I haven't received any new emails, so if you're enjoying the show, please do write in, and you can get a shout out in the next episode. And you can support me on Patreon as well if you want to take an extra step to support the show. But more of that at the end of the video. Let's jump into today's episode. My guest today has a Bachelor of Science in Botany and Zoology from La Trobe University and has worked in tourism for 20 years across Australia, including positions in private enterprise and government organisations. He also worked for 10 years in tour guiding roles around the country, including birding tours for beginners and experts. He was invited by Tourism Northern Territory to the UK Bird Fair twice, representing tour operators from Australia, and achieved the Specialist Bird Guide endorsement through Birds Australia in 2008. He has delivered tourism training programs throughout the Northern Territory for Charles Darwin University, including the Birds Australia Avi Tourism course and Kakadu Knowledge for Tour Guides course. As a Tourism Development Officer for the Parks and Wildlife Commission, NT, he understands the challenges in tourism from a commercial, business, and a government agency perspective. So now based in Albury, today's guest currently works for BirdLife Australia as the Southern New South Wales Woodland Bird Project Coordinator with the Woodland Birds team. He enjoys engaging with landowners and community groups to promote the Birds on Farms project by raising awareness of the need to protect, create, and maintain woodland bird habitat. So lots to talk about today. I'm excited for this one. Please welcome Ben Humphries on the show. How are you doing, Ben?
Very well, thanks, Guillaume. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you for the time and the energy. And let's jump right into the first question of the show, which is, what aspect of birding brings you the most joy?
Well, there's so much joy to be had, isn't there? Probably some of my favourite things about bird watching is purely just knowing that we have good diversity in our landscape. Aren't we so lucky that the country's been managed for tens of thousands of years in such a way that we've got so many diverse birds to enjoy today and moving forward for future generations. I do just enjoy hearing them, seeing them, watching them do their thing, and most of all, sharing that experience with others. For me personally, it's a way of connecting with country. I find the birds are always there wherever we go, and it's a fantastic way to connect with the birds, thinking about where their next feed's coming from, putting ourselves in their shoes, thinking about where our mates are, where we're going to find shelter after dark. And I think that developing that connection with country is an essential part of our health and well-being. I get that from bird watching.
For sure, yeah, and I said this in a previous episode where you only get a glimpse of the bird's life whenever you're birding. You know, most often it's only seconds that you see a bird, and you know, and there's so much more to a bird's life than those few seconds that you're looking at it. I think, that's also
It's just a tiny window, isn't it? It's just a snapshot.
For sure, absolutely, yeah, and
leaves us wondering and keeps us coming back for more.
Absolutely, and that's kind of the basis also of the scientific approach to birding and conservation and research and you know, project coordination, because you know it's the passion that drives you can yield really good results. And so your passion for birding, tell me a little bit about that. How did you kind of get into birding? What sparked your interest?
It's such a common question, and I think it's such a common theme, the answer. Many people state that they got into birding thanks to a relative or a mentor at some stage in their life that inspired the interest. For me, I had a grandfather who used to keep a list everywhere he went and wherever he lived, and had a very large book. It might have been like a Reader's Digest book, a very large hardback book that was exciting for me to read his lists, but also a father and mother who were right into nature. But I remember specifically driving wherever we'd drive and we'd see the power lines with the kookaburra on the lines, and Dad would always say, "Oh, here's a kookaburra, look at this. Hang on, there'll be another one here in a minute." And sure enough, 200 metres down the road, there's its mate sitting on the wire, and just always left me wondering and full of intrigue. And it's led to a lifelong journey in birding.
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful. It's great when it's, there is an added bonus when it's kind of also in the family, that the passion, I suppose, because you can kind of share it with the people you love most, which is beautiful too, for sure.
Great opportunity. I now have kids and they have binoculars, and they are excellent for their age at identifying birds, whether it's on the bird bath out the front or when we go bush. It's great fun.
Fantastic. I love it. And so speaking about the bush, right, and the birds that live there, tell me a little bit about the habitat itself. We'll get into the details of the project specifically a bit later, but what's special about the Southern New South Wales woodland that kind of draws you in to work on it?
Personally, I'm drawn by the diversity of the landscape, but sadly, the significance, I suppose, of the woodland habitat is that it's disappearing right before our eyes, has been for some time. So I'm told we used to be able to walk from somewhere like Melbourne through to Sydney through, temperate woodlands continuous all the way. So now with development of communities and whatnot, highways and things, we now have extensive development, which has led to the destruction or degradation of habitat, but also the fragmentation of habitat. So our temperate woodland birds are in trouble. They need our help. And that brings me to the role that I'm working in at the moment. Our project area is in the fertile soils of the southwest slopes of the Slopes to Summit region, so sort of that western southwest side of the Great Dividing Range. But the woodland corridor, essentially, and the woodland birds are found, as you know, from Victoria right up that Great Dividing Range into southern Queensland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's incredible. The statistic to hear that there would be continuous woodland from Melbourne to Sydney, pretty much, that's mind-blowing. And now it's just beyond words, really. Like, and that goes to show also of course, it's linked with the decline of the Regent honeyeater, because that's a woodland specialist as well. And wow, that's incredible. So what exactly is the project working to achieve then?
So our aims of the project are to focus on the gaps. We've identified serious gaps in our knowledge. There are plenty of records, as you know, of birds in public land and national park estates, and that's fantastic that we've got that data. But there is a significant lack of records from private land in agricultural spaces. So our particular aim of the project is to try and develop our knowledge of those bird populations on private land, but also to raise community awareness, monitor those bird populations on private land, and implement some targeted on-ground interventions that are going to, as you say, create, protect, enhance woodland bird habitat into the future.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting, the dichotomy that you mentioned between public places, national parks, and private places. Give us an idea. What's the percentage? Maybe you don't know, but the percentage of private land versus public land. Do you have an idea about that? Just out of interest.
I don't actually have a percentage of the public land and national park estates in New South Wales, but I do believe the agricultural space or private lands agricultural and rural properties space is sort of up around 60-70% in New South Wales, and about the same across the whole of Australia, and even in terms of farming land across the globe, it's sort of 70-80%, something like that. So a significant portion of land that we perhaps need to focus more attention on. There's plenty of work in this space, which is exciting to be part of.
There's so much of this space that has not been monitored because of the fact that so what's preventing it? Accessibility, simply, is it? That you can't go into these private places?
Yeah, it's a real draw card of our program, I think, a real hook for our volunteers and our landholders to learn from each other, but also get exclusive access to previously unbirded country, which is always exciting if you're a birder, of course, but to meet new people and get out on new places is very social and very exciting for a lot of people. We know that a lot of the national parks estates are set up in great habitat, but often in the more rugged, rocky sort of substrate escarpments, whereas the fertile flats along the river corridors and things like that are often those private spaces. So we're focusing a lot of attention on those areas.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that? Like, do you principally interact with the landowners on this subject? How do you approach them, and how do you interact with them to achieve that?
So it's normally through engagement, community engagement events with the local land care groups, community groups. We get a lot of support in southern New South Wales from the Ovens and Murray BirdLife branch. And through those engagement events, we get to meet a lot of landholders, a lot of birders, both people new to birding and also people very experienced. So a great pool of knowledge to tap into there. Often our landholders are happy to do the surveys, set up the sites, record their data themselves. A lot of landholders are still learning about their birds and need some assistance. So that's where our team helps with the survey effort, or we try and assign experienced volunteers to assist those landholders. If people join the program as a volunteer and would like to develop their skills in birding, we work together with them through various workshops throughout the year and try and build their skills so that we can get out on country with the landholders and sort of go through a bit of a mentoring induction process with the new volunteer and introduce them to the landholder. And usually that develops quite a strong relationship between us and the landholder and the volunteer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was going to say, because like these landholders, it's important for the data to be accurate, isn't it? And for that to be the case, then the landholders need to know their birds. So it all comes down to birding, really, which is fantastic. And the landholders can also act as a kind of seed of awareness throughout their community, like in these small country towns, which is great, and that spreads the word even farther for birds and for the project itself. It's fantastic.
Yes, if it's not engagement events that we meet people, it's usually through our existing project participants, the landholders or the volunteers themselves say, hey, I've got friends or family or a neighbour who's got an interest in birds and they've got some great habitat, and often we end up catching up with people and then going to visit their property and establishing sites there. So a great way to spread the word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so how long has the project been operational? Has it been? Have you got many years of data now to be able to garner some insights and discoveries, or is it still more of a work in progress at the moment?
No, we have been operating in southern New South Wales since 2019, November 2019. Prior to that, the Birds on Farms program started in Victoria, southern southeast Australia mainly, but Victoria now has 200 participating properties, and we also have a Birds on Farms program up in central West New South Wales. So 3 main areas that we're focusing on at the moment. But initially, back in the 90s, Birds on Farms in Victoria generated a huge data set which is now significant age, and we're still using that data to come up with recommendations to landholders on ways they can enhance the bird populations on their property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And an important aspect of all this, I suppose, like as the years and decades go by, and is passing on the knowledge and passing on the passion for birds and I suppose a sense of urgency to help birds out with the problems that are happening. And so, I mean, we briefly touched on this before we hit record, but do you have any? I suppose what I'm trying to get at is, would you encourage younger people as well to join in? And if so, how could younger birders who are listening join in? Maybe if they live in South New South Wales or Northeast Victoria, how would they go about maybe getting into this?
Sure, that's often a question we get asked. We do have a significant pool of volunteers and landholders with a wealth or a lifetime of knowledge, and that's in a way their legacy to the conservation of birds and biodiversity on their land and across the country and the globe. But we need to tap into that knowledge such that it's not lost when those people move on. And we need to target the younger generations and spread that knowledge and share new and innovative ways of monitoring birds, and acoustic monitoring and the likes. New techniques are constantly being brought into the conversation and the methodology of the data collection. So the younger generation can certainly help us with that. BirdLife runs an extensive Birds in Schools program. There are also lots of opportunities for people to monitor birds seasonally in their backyards, Birds in Backyards program. There's also the Aussie Backyard Bird Count, which is a Australia-wide annual event that's very popular amongst families and younger generations, very easy to get involved. And all those programs you can find on the BirdLife Australia website. As far as Birds on Farms goes, we're working with our partners in community groups and land care groups to try and inspire younger members, and also the BirdLife branches, but also connecting with universities and the like to try and get people who've finished various degrees and qualifications to get involved in the birding community and help us with that survey effort by becoming a volunteer.
Have you made any kind of significant discoveries yet on perhaps a particular species or a general trend of woodland birds? Have you been able to decipher that yet, or?
We have. The project's only been going 2.5 years, so very difficult to draw significant conclusions from that amount of data. Thankfully, combined with the data from Victoria and central New South Wales, we have been able to do some analysis. Back in 2000, there was a publication brought out that essentially gave people on rural properties and farming properties 10 steps to bird-friendly management, so approaches to try and encourage birds to your property. So that publication is still available and still currently used today. We're in the process of revising that moving forward to include new data, and hopefully that comes out later on, that publication later on this year. What we have noticed is there are birds here, which is great. However, there's still a lot of habitat degradation and fragmentation. So our project is a partnership between Save Our Species, New South Wales Government, Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife, and working with a local land care group, Holbrook Land Care Network. And our target species for our what's called nectar sippers, Saving the Nectar Sippers project, is the little lorikeet, the black-chinned honeyeater, and the dusky wood swallow. So as you would know, these species are seasonally dispersive through the landscape, and we are running quarterly surveys on people's properties. So it's not unusual to miss those birds in the small window of time that they're moving through our landscape. So we don't have huge data on the huge amounts of records, I should say, on the black-chinned honeyeater or the little lorikeet. They seem to be a bit more elusive and move through the landscape quite quickly. at certain times a year. However, we do have more sightings of the dusky wood swallows, which are probably easier to find and easier to recognise than a lot of or the other couple of birds. So we find our participants tend to be finding those more often, which is great to see. We use what's called the Temperate Woodland Bird Conservation Action Plan, which has been put together by BirdLife Australia. That's essentially our guiding tool. It's had input from all sorts of stakeholders, from community to research institutes, government, non-government organisations. Our guiding tool that helps us determine the best conservation outcomes for woodland birds. So within that, we've identified in our project area 33 species are known to occur fairly regularly through the project area, but they are identified as threatened and declining in New South Wales. And so far, we've managed to record 26 of those in our project area and on our site. So we're pretty excited about that. However, they're the ones being threatened and declining that we're using as indicator species of healthy habitat. So if landholders are finding those, we're saying, hey, there's obviously something here that they're enjoying, that they need, they depend on, even if it is seasonally. Let's try and protect that, enhance that, and maintain it into the future.
Right. Yeah. It's all about, it's conservation. It's a definition of conservation, isn't it? The maintenance and enhancing and protecting of a given area. And you mentioned habitat fragmentation a few minutes ago, and that's also an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? And some species are much more adaptable than others, and I'm sure that's reflected in the records and the sightings that the project has unveiled. So there's still a lot of kind of I suppose lots to find out, isn't there? Because the fragmentation is really interesting to me. And so what would be the just going back, I'm interested in also the threats that exist to these places. So if landholders are listening to this, who are interested in nature and birds, what are the main threats they should be aware of regarding this special habitat that is on their land?
Sure. So the loss of habitat is no doubt the key threat to woodland birds. Things like cats, foxes, other threats can be a real problem as well, as we know. But in terms of things we can work on as far as habitat's concerned, one of the guiding recommendations from the Birds on Farms data suggests that if we can encourage landholders to set aside up to 30% of their land area for habitat, and 10% of the farm if we can encourage people to have native vegetation, that's going to significantly increase the numbers of birds that you're going to see. And then the flow-on effects of having birds on your property are quite impressive in terms of controlling insect pests, turning over soil, creating aeration, plus the restoration efforts that you're doing. Putting in shelter belts has, productivity, profitability benefits to the farm in terms of lambing rates and shelter for stock and things like that. Also maintaining soil with that wind protection. So quite a few flow-on effects that, landholders are interested in with respect to profitability of their enterprise, but also a huge impact on well-being and mental health has been something we've identified in our project, just from feedback from landholders who really seem to thrive after coming off the back of some hard times recently. Lots of people are reporting just a better state of health and well-being thanks to knowing that they're doing something for biodiversity and they're out there in amongst it every day. They're feeling country, they're connecting with country, they know if something's not in balance, and really enjoying those interactions with the birds and the biodiversity.
A habitat like that and birds can bring so much joy, and that brings us back to the joy of birding at the beginning, which just it can make your life better for sure, and I'm sure that's what you've seen in the project, which is great.
Absolutely. And as you know, there's many properties who've suffered extensive drought in recent times, and that then rolled into some significant fire events that have really impacted people's wellbeing, and we're getting a lot of feedback from participants who are just really enjoying getting back on country, rehabilitating country, and reaping the rewards of being out in nature, and the impact on people's happiness is described as hitting you in the face. You go out there and there's birds around, you can hear the songs, you can see the birds, and that has a really positive impact on people.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is wonderful, and I was really glad to have you on the show, because it's I love using this platform to communicate things like that, and yeah, anything else you want to add about the project or share?
Well, we do have a particular methodology, which is the 20-minute 2-hectare survey method, and those surveys are done quarterly over a 6-week period. So essentially we have surveys for 6 weeks, and then a period where we don't do surveys, and those windows of time come around very quickly, and we don't want it to be onerous on landholders, and that's why we're happy to offer assistance from our team or from our trained up skilled volunteers. The results are recorded on Birdata, BirdLife Australia's database, and those results are then analysed to determine the best conservation outcomes for our birds. Actions that people can implement right across their properties, but also right down to a backyard scale.
Well, that's actually a topic that we discussed, while we were emailing, the data collection aspect, which is a huge, arguably the most important part of the whole thing. I'm sure that our listeners will be familiar with eBird and Birdata as well. So I understand that some of the members of the project do use eBird, but the vital data is collected with Birdata. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, people are welcome to use whatever format they like. BirdLife Australia uses and manages the Birdata, so that's the one we primarily use for Birds on Farms project. We have asked landholders and volunteers to work together to learn from each other for the quarterly surveys. We try and encourage landholders to identify sites that they're interested in, different types of habitat per site, up to 4 per property. Over 4 starts to get a bit onerous. So those habitat types might be a patch of remnant that they're fencing off, or perhaps even still grazing, is an interesting comparison to a patch of revegetation that they might have fenced off, of different ages. Often people have a site around their house area, which is often a combination of natives and garden plants and the like, and also the riparian zone. So if people have a drainage line or a creek line or a river, even river frontage, some sites along there are particularly of interest in comparison to those other habitat types. And all up, we have 52 properties. Our project area from Albury, New South Wales, extends west to Corowa, up north almost to Henty, and then east out to Jingellic on the river corridor, including that Holbrook region of the southwest slopes. So in those 52 properties, we have 139 sites at the moment, and so far we've recorded 183 different species across that landscape. So we're particularly happy with that, given that we've only been in operation effectively out of Albury for 2.5 years. And we welcome more landholders and more volunteers to the program. We look forward to people getting involved and helping us with that survey effort. The more properties we take on, the more volunteers we rely on to help us conduct those quarterly surveys. And it's a great fun opportunity to meet new people, and we all love the social aspect of birding, but also that exclusive access to private property. You just never know what's going to turn up.
Yeah, it's great. It really is fantastic. And the whole, you mentioned, riverside properties, which there's no shortage of that in the Upper Murray, You know, and I have quite a strong personal connection with the Murray, the Upper Murray region, because my mum lives there, and hi mum if you're listening. And it really is a great initiative, because what are your thoughts on birding that whole area, like more generally? Would you say it's particularly rich, nationally speaking, more than other places, or?
Yes, I would say it's particularly rich. I think it's particularly consistent. When we go to that Upper Murray region, we know we're always going to get birds, and that's the same here on the southwest slopes around Albury. But the Upper Murray is a fascinating area because of the disturbance that's managed to endure over the last few years. So we have some really passionate landholders who are really interested in protecting biodiversity on their land following those events, and great opportunities in some cases to see how that regeneration comes back and how the biodiversity tracks along with that regeneration as well.
Yeah, for sure. And also with that whole part starting from Albury out towards Jingellic, it starts to get quite mountainous and wilder in some sense, which I imagine works to the benefit of the project in some cases, where the habitat is protected by its topography in a way. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's plenty of refuges and little really highly specific sections of habitat where we find all sorts of birds that we wouldn't find out here on the rolling flats along the river corridor. So yeah, it's always exciting to get up there and find some of those, particularly those seasonal birds that move up to the mountains and back out to the flats at certain times of year. The flame robins, the scarlet robins, those sort of guys, but also the yellow-tailed black cockatoos that come and go. The gangs are around, the gang cockatoos. So yeah, great diversity up that way.
And Albury itself is perhaps when birders think of Albury, they automatically think of Chiltern, don't they? Because and Glen Rowan, the turquoise parrot, but Chiltern's wonderful. It's like probably the best known birding spot close to Albury. I would probably say that. But what are some other maybe great birding spots around Albury that you particularly like?
So a really consistent spot all year round is the Wonga wetlands. The Wonga wetlands is pretty much in the heart of Albury, just on the river corridor. Extensive wetlands, great variety thanks to the diversity of habitat of wetland birds right through to many of your woodland bird species as well. Going further north up the highway, we have places like Tarcutta and Livingstone National Park, which are excellent spots for, there's some really old ironbarks and the like in there, which attract things like the regent honeyeaters and swift parrots on their migration. So forever in with a chance of catching up with one of those guys. And there are great opportunities through BirdLife Australia to be involved in those recovery and monitoring programs. I was lucky enough to have my kids out at the Hume Weir here in Albury, 15 minutes from centre of Albury, 2 years ago in June, where there was some regent honeyeaters reported there, and I'd never seen them before. And we found ourselves lying on the ground, looking up. Even without the use of binoculars, we were able to watch this pair of regent honeyeaters scooting around. And strangely enough, it was in a tree that is right next to the car park and the lookout and the wall of the Hume Weir Reservoir. So quite a high profile spot, only to return there the following year and find 6 swift parrots moving through on their migration. So whilst it's a really high profile tourist spot, if there are flowering gums there at the right time of year, we were lucky enough to catch those birds moving through. So once again, you just never know what's going to turn up with these seasonally dispersive birds.
Absolutely. Wow. What a great story. You just never know. Anything can appear anywhere, really. That's the wonderful thing about birding. And another aspect of birding, which I love to touch on, is photography too. Because, and also looping back to the project, I suppose photography, well, I don't know, is it an important tool for the project, for the birds on farms and the woodland birds in general? Is photography a tool that you use a lot, or not as much?
It's definitely something we use for certain components of the program. Our engagement events, it's very important for us to capture some of those social birding moments and share those with our participants. And that also helps us promote the program. Doing things like this, podcasts and short videos. We love being involved in that sort of thing, a great way to spread the word and raise awareness about the threats facing woodland birds, but also celebrate the achievements of the project. I leave the photography to others. There's so much development in the equipment you can use at the moment. I think we're only going to see bigger and better results as far as monitoring and recording results using photography and video and the like, as that develops. And that could also help us bring in a younger audience to the birding community. We've got some very skilled bird watching photographers in our community here in Albury, and also amongst our Birds on Farm staff team. So I leave that to them. I'm just happy watching them and knowing that they're here and hearing them and imitating them, but not a photographer of birds myself.
I see. Yeah. That's always an interesting thing to discuss too, isn't it? That dichotomy. So yeah, let's start to wrap up, Ben. It's been fantastic, really great episode, and I hope listeners are also as excited as I am. But so the classic question, and I don't know if it's going to be, I don't know what I'm guessing your answer will be, but what's your favorite bird?
Well, that depends, Guillaume. You were suggesting we might talk about a dream bird. We get asked about our favourite bird a lot, but you were mentioning earlier a dream bird. So if I'm to imagine a dream bird that would be my favourite, I don't know if you're familiar with The Lord of the Rings, but when Samwise Gamgee and Frodo get picked up by the eagle out of the lava, that's my dream bird. You know, I want one of those.
Wow,
I'd love to see one. But look, I have a close connection with red-tailed black cockatoos and crimson rosellas. How can you be that bright and colourful but so camouflaged in the Aussie bush? But also things like bushstone curlews are a favourite of mine. I spent quite a lot of time living and working as a guide in Kakadu, so I was spoilt for birds up there with brolgas and black-necked storks sort of standing eye to eye with you. That was amazing to experience. But bushstone curlews wandering around and calling all night in our backyard. Red-tailed black cockatoos following us through the escarpment, leading us through the escarpment, perhaps, depending on which way you want to interpret it. We had a fantastic experience with a good friend of mine who was working for Birds Australia back in the day. He was a photographer and he managed to capture white-lined honeyeater, which are endemic to Kakadu, sandstone shrike thrush calling at the same time, visible on the escarpment, and the other endemic chestnut-quilled rock pigeon, home to Kakadu, all in the one frame, which as a photographer, which I'm not, it would have been a bit of a highlight for him at the time. And I couldn't believe to see, three of these really significant, iconic birds in the one space at the one time, and just makes you realise how lucky we are to find ourselves in those situations, but how lucky we are to have that sort of diversity in this country to enjoy and be proud of.
Birding kind of paints a picture of the place as well, doesn't it? When you think of these birds, you also think about the place, and it's funny you mentioned Lord of the Rings. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and I've never thought about it. Imagine if those eagles actually existed somewhere, that'd change things a bit, wouldn't it? Oh.
Well, they're big enough as they are in real life, aren't they? But pretty impressive, powerful units. Good to see them working for the powers of good and not for the powers of evil. As far as a dream destination, I would love to get over to Papua New Guinea and have a look at some of the species over there, just the colours and the different behaviours of those, birds showing off that you see on the Attenborough programs and the like. Just fascinating.
Yeah, I share that sentiment. To want to go to New Guinea. That's and especially, the more remote reaches in the higher mountain parts of New Guinea, where you get some crazy birds there. It's so beautiful. And given that Papua New Guinea is so close, actually, I'm surprised that maybe not more birders go to Papua New Guinea. That's the impression I get. Maybe. Do you agree with that?
I do. I was lucky enough to go to the UK Bird Fair a few years ago and represent tourism operators from Australia over there doing bird tours. So just fascinating to see the diversity of different tour products around the world. Sri Lanka, India are big birding countries, obviously the States. But, the smaller places, I made a bit of a cynical joke with a bloke from Iceland and said, when are we going to Iceland for the bird fair over in Iceland? And he said, we're having our 4th bird fair coming up later on this year. And I sort of was on the back foot. They've got amazing diversity of birds over there. Places closer to home, like Christmas Island, I remember had a stack of brochures for birding. That was a big form of tourism there. And Papua New Guinea, just the colours and the cultural content that you can experience on a birding tour over there is just very impressive, I think.
That's a fantastic note to end on. Ben, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on. We'll keep in touch, and I hope listeners or viewers, if you're watching on YouTube, have enjoyed this episode. I guess I could leave your email address below if they want to contact you about getting involved, or...
Yes, please. Yep, happy to do that. We also have a link to the Birds on Farms page on the BirdLife Australia website. Thanks very much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. Take care and happy birding. Thank you for listening to or watching this episode of the Birding Today podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to stay up to date with the show, you can follow me on all my social media platforms. And if you want to take it a step further and support the show and also get some cool benefits, you can support me on Patreon as well. So again, thank you for listening or watching, and I'll see you in the next one.